Vitis aestivalis is also an American species. It's native again to the eastern United States. Again, it's very cold hardy. This cold hardiness, by the way, cold hardiness is just the ability of a plant to survive through the winter time, which is very important in the eastern United States because the temperatures go down to crazy levels. This is horrendous, by the way. If you're from the Northeast, you know that you can leave the Northeast, right? You don't have to stay here, right? It's amazing to me. People have like decided to stay here, spend their entire lives in the Northeast. You don't have to do that. You can move somewhere where the weather's actually nice. That there's freedom of movement. So cold hardiness is very important for us in the Northeast because our vines can die in the wintertime. Vitis vinifera actually isn't super cold hardy. So you do get these winters here where a lot of vines will die. So using these American species can be helpful for some folks to get through some of those winters. So it also can be helpful for us when we breed vines. We do hybrid vines, so like two species like Vitis vinifera and some other like an American species together. One of the nice things that can come out of that is some cold hardiness being conferred from the American species, or North American species. Okay, so it's pretty cold hardy. They're drought tolerant. They're resistant to fungal diseases as well. All these kind of North American varieties, because all these North American species are pretty resistant to fungal diseases because they kind of grew up in harsh environments with heavy disease pressure and heavy pest pressure from phylloxera. So Norton and Cynthiana are two cultivars that are relatively common of aestivalis. Again, not super common. The Chrysalis here is wine brand in Virginia, and they have, I believe, the largest planting of Vitis aestivalis in the United States. Actually, and I think Norton. So Norton's actually not even true aestivalis. Neither is Cynthiana. These are both kind of aestivalis, like Labruscanas. They're like estivalisanas or something, right? Norton was actually, I know for sure, was a product of probably a product of a intentional breeding effort. But anyways, but yeah, Chrysalis has the largest planting and it's only about 100 acres, I think. So still not that important economically. But yeah, also often used in jellies and jams and juices, but also wine, right? So this is Norton here from Chrysalis. There's also a winery in, go back. There's also a winery in Virginia called Horton, and they make Horton Norton, which is pretty adorable. Vitis rupestris, native to the southwest of the United States. It's mostly extinct in the wild due to encroachment with it's found a lot in Texas, but there's been a lot of development in Texas, which has kind of made this mostly extinct. It's very drought tolerant, so it's found on pretty rocky soils in Texas, pretty rocky, dry soils. So the rooting architecture goes down rather than out. It goes down and explores deeper into the soil than other rootstocks. Again, it's phylloxera tolerant. All these North American species are. Vitis riparia, it's the most widespread in the United States. If y'all walk around out here in Ithaca, you'll see grapevines everywhere. You generally won't see grapes on them. Sometimes you will, but you'll see the leaves, and the leaves, they look like a grape leaf. It is a grapevine. And that's what usually is what you're seeing as Vitis riparia. They're found along, not always, but they're found along riverbanks, right? So riparian, right? So if you think of like a riparian strip or riparian zone, when people talk about that, what they're talking about is an area along a waterway, right? And so it happens with this rootstock, it's shallow rooting because the water table that it's used to is very high. So the roots, rather than going down, they don't want to get in water and then get some sort of root rot. Or also, like, roots need oxygen because they need to be able to do gas exchange, right? So roots put out CO2 and bring in oxygen, right? So it's the opposite of a leaf, right? So a leaf puts out oxygen, brings in CO2. the opposite happens in a root. It puts out CO2 and it acidifies the root zone, and then it brings in oxygen, right? So you don't want to smother a root because it can't do that. So Vitis riparia goes out kind of more laterally in the soil, which makes it not super drought tolerant, right? Because the root's very shallow. Tends to be early budding and early ripening as well. So when we have rootstocks like Vitis riparia, that we have one called Riparia gloire, which is straight Vitis riparia, the scion will generally break bud and ripen sooner than if we put the scion on other rootstocks. So again, it's phylloxera tolerant, and it's used as very commonly used as a rootstock parent, right? And it's used in hybrids. So again, like I said, Cornell does grape breeding. Just checking the time. Cornell does grape breeding, and the major effort for Cornell's breeding program is breeding grapes for New York and the Northeast, right? And what is the major problem here in the Northeast? Fungal disease pressure. That's the biggest issue, because you get roughly 4 inches of rain every month through the growing season. So we have heavy powdery mildew, botrytis, and downy mildew pressure here. Very, very heavy pressure. So they breed varieties with Vitis vinifera with American species to then, because these American species are pretty tolerant of those fungal diseases. And so mainly what they're looking for is that fungal disease tolerance to be conferred into the progeny, right? But one of the things that they're concerned with is a lot of times hybrids have kind of poor color in the fruit, especially in the reds. So Vitis riparia, if you use that in the parentage, then you can improve the color a bit in the hybrid. Yeah. So Vitis vinifera. It's native again to the Transcaucasus and like Europe. So it's native to like that area all along, like again, Republic of Georgia, Azerbaijan, that area all in the Caucasus. And we'll talk about the history of Vitis vinifera and which is also the history of wine. We'll talk about that in a later lecture. But yeah, Vitis vinifera is easily the most cultivated species around the world. I believe it's about 90% or something of the total like kind of global production of grapes. It has perfect flowers, so they pollinate, or they pollinate themselves, which is awesome, right? Again, we don't have to. What's so nice about growing Vitis vinifera or Labruscana, any of these kinds of things, or hybrids, is that they have perfect flowers, so we don't have to have male and female plants and like wind blowing pollen around and bees moving pollen, right? That doesn't happen for us. So colony collapse is fine. It's not fine. If you're not familiar with colony collapse, by the way, go look it up and be more depressed about the state of the world. Bees are dying off, and it's incredibly problematic, and is going to lead to probably major economic issues if we can't figure out either A, how to take care of the bees, or B, how to make some sort of economic replacement for bees. They provide a major service for humanity. But we don't need them for grapes. We don't need bees. We don't need wind. They just pollinate. They pollinate themselves. The growth habits generally kind of upright. A lot of these North American species are actually pretty prostrate. They kind of go down a bit. Like Concord is kind of like floppy. So you grow it on a trellis that kind of like does what it wants to do. It just flops out a bit, where Vitis vinifera is pretty upright, which is why we have a lot of these kind of upright trellises. It's one of the reasons. Yeah, it produces a kind of a small vine with small leaves, kind of lower yielding than all these other species I've showed you. The roots, again, are highly susceptible to phylloxera, which is mostly why we use all those other species that I showed you. The major economic contributor of those species is really as rootstocks, not so much as cultivars for wine production. Yeah, the fruit, again, is highly susceptible to fungal diseases. So again, that's why crossing Vitis vinifera with something like Vitis aestivalis or Vitis riparia or whatever, those North American species, that's one of the major reasons we're doing this, is to make a grape that's kind of vinifera-like because it makes better wine than straight North American species, but also not vinifera because we don't want to have to deal with all those fungal diseases, right? Of course, and another major reason we're doing those crosses is for cold hardiness, to deal with those gnarly winters here in the Northeast and in the Midwest. Yeah, so the yields tend to be much lower, and the wine quality is very high, right? And that's why, like, you know, generally people would say, like, you can make good wine out of hybrids, but not great wine. But you can make great wine out of Vitis vinifera. I don't know if I exactly agree with that, because I think you absolutely can make great wine out of hybrids. I think it's about intention. It's about how you grow things. It's about attention to detail. And it's also about years of learning about these cultivars. We know so much more about Vitis vinifera as a wine species, and not really, these hybrids are all very new. So I think this point is proven when you drink something like Enniskillen Vidal Blanc ice wine. Enniskillen is a winery up in Canada, and they make this ice wine from Vidal Blanc, which is a hybrid. It's phenomenal, and consistently gets, like, 100 points in all the publications, and sommeliers love it. And it's a hybrid. It's a world-class wine. So I don't know if I entirely agree that hybrids don't make excellent wine quality. I think there's just a lot to learn there. But and there's more hybrids coming out every day. So I think take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, these are the varieties you know. So this is Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Chardonnay, all that stuff. That's Vitis vinifera. Which of these rootstocks is the least drought tolerant? Vitis vinifera, Vitis rupestris, Vitis riparia, or Berlandieri? Which I did not talk about Berlandieri. Okay, I see some answers changing, going the right direction. Right, so riparia. Right, remember riparian strip. So a riparian strip is an area along a waterway. So the water table is going to be high. So the rooting architecture is going to be more out, like lateral, and not down. Right, so rupestris goes pretty straight down. Berlandieri, which is one I haven't talked about, but Berlandieri is also native to Texas, like these kind of limestone-rich soils of Texas. So this rootstock here, this species, it has high lime tolerance, and it's also pretty drought tolerant because it's from a really kind of limey, dry soils of Texas. But remember, riparia, it's along riverbanks and it roots out, right? It's a shallow rooting thing. So because it's shallow rooting, it is not very drought tolerant.